Right, the subject of my talk is John Singer Sargent and Joachim Sorolla. They belong to that elite group of bravura painters who dominated who dominated the international art world at the end of the 19th century. The whole group of these painters, Aldini, Zorn, Sargent and Sorolla, famous for their powerful and dazzling portraits of the rich and famous. They were also prolific landscapists in an impressionist idiom, or naturalist idiom, obsessed with light, and monumental mural painters. And actually I rather liked Edmund's description because it also rather fits Sargent, his beginning with as a Royal Academician doing general show, contributing to general shows, then doing one-man shows, and then ending with the murals. They came from very different backgrounds. As we know, Sorolla, seen here in the self-portrait, was from a very impoverished background. He was an orphan at a very young age, and he had a real battle to succeed. Whereas Sargent completely different, but of course rooted in Spain, where Sargent was kind of stateless. His improvident parents brought their family to Europe, and they followed a sort of migratory existence, rather like gypsies, going all around Europe, never staying anywhere long enough to, as Sargent's sister said, never lived anywhere long enough to own their own furniture. And here you see Sargent as a bearded, large man in a self-portrait that contributed to that famous collection of self-portraits in the Uffizi. Sargent, I'm going to start with first of all, really makes his mark in Paris. His parents are determined that as he's going to be an artist, he must go to the best place where you could be trained, and Paris is really where it's all happening at that stage. It would have been Rome a bit earlier. And Sargent joins the atelier of an artist called Carus Duran, whose great gift as a teacher was to teach his pupils to paint from the word go, not to do all that elaborate drawing from the cast and then from the nude before you were allowed near a paintbrush. He got his students painting right from the word go, and always paint in terms of tonal values. Each stroke of the brush should describe a tone or a half tone, and it was that skill with the brush, that instinctive response to light and form that really underlay Sargent's success as a painter. It has to be said that he was also doing his homework in the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, so he was also a very rigorous draftsman, but he really learned his skills in Paris. And he began really as a very young man to make his mark in the salon. On the left is a portrait of his master, Carus Duran, a sort of farewell to him, the young pupil, as it were, acknowledging his debt to the master. And Carus Duran is quite a flamboyant character, as you can see, and I love the way he's sort of off the casualness of the apparent casualness of the pose, and he's holding an elegant cane, and he's seated in a rather casual way, but it's absolutely forceful, quite dark toned, and in case you'll see just there, that is in case you just think he's a sort of deputy, that's the Légion d'honneur. And on the other side, one of Sargent's early patrons, Madame Sumakazo, who's South American. Sargent had quite a lot of South American patrons, and here she is in high aesthetic step. This is 1879, 1880. These are both showstoppers at the salon, and she's turned from the piano as if she's seen somebody or somebody's come into the room. The black piano, and I love the Islamic tiles with the flowers, and this lovely dress, a sort of rather arty little chair. He's all very marvellous, and he won a prize at the Salon. And he starts painting 1874, born in 1856, so when he's exhibiting these, he's in his very early 20s. Quite different start for, oh no, also, yes, he's also making his mark not only as a portrait painter, but also as a landscape painter or figure painter. And this gorgeous picture of the women going down from Concar, going down to the oyster beds. You kept the oysters in beds until they were a certain size, and then you brought them up from the market. And the women would come down every morning to tend the oyster beds, these great expanses of sand. And it's got this feeling of a breezy day on the Brittany coast, lovely pools of water in the foreground, and then this quite staged, rather academic processional picture of figures, and then the sweep of it might be by, I don't know, it could even be early Monet or something, and Sargent's very involved. He's both doing the academic side of things, he's doing the grand portraits, he's infatuated with Manet, who was the great hero to the people of this generation. Manet, who wasn't really ever an impressionist in my view, but who goes on exhibiting at the Salon, gets bashed over the head all the time, but still keeps going. And again, is concerned, it sees himself as an artist in the great Western tradition. And yes, everything goes a bit wrong for Sargent. He's riding high in Paris. He's got a number of French and American patrons, and then he exhibits a famous portrait of Madame Gautreau, the lady whose originally the strap was off the shoulder. There's a rather good book all about it called Strapless. And this really got up the noses. I mean, she appears to be the quintessence of Parisian chic. Of course, she's rather outrageous because she's very sexy, very her own woman, and really she couldn't care a damn about what you think of her. It's provocative, and Sargent's being provocative. Never that sinuous arm, the black, the very white flesh. She's supposed to have used particular flesh whitening things to get that extraordinary, and then that profile. Anyway, it got up the noses of the Parisian public, and he was really damned. Everybody came to mock this picture. So he's rather with his tail between his legs. And we were talking about Broadway, the Broadway colony of American, English and American artists and writer friends who really pick him up after this debauch. And then it's the big breakthrough is in America. In 1887, a rich banker asks Sargent to come and paint his wife, and Sargent doesn't want to go and names an enormous price and simply should accept it. And Sargent has been exhibiting in America, so though he's never lived there, he's known there, and he's treated as a sort of returning hero. And this is one of the portraits from that very cool customer, Mrs. Charles Inches, in her Worth dress. Very fashionable woman, but she was also actually a bit more than meets the eye. She was also a poetess in her own right, amongst other things. And he goes back in 1890 and has an even bigger triumph with being commissioned in the Boston Public Library, just built in the Beaux-Arts, McKim, and White, neo-Renaissance building. He's asked to decorate the upper, and he chooses the theme of religion, taking the thing from the story of religion from the pagans through the Jews to the Christians, and designing all the enrichments. It takes him about 30 years to do. But for him, public art was his greatest, he regarded as his greatest contribution. And there's the pagan end with the Egyptians and the Assyrians beating up the poor Jews there. Enormously rich iconography, both drawn from the past but also his own take on these stories. And there's the trees of prophets underneath. Well, Sorolla, of course, had a very different road to success. He really, as we've heard, it was a lot of his time in Rome was terribly important. That he won a scholarship to Rome as a sort of, and he had to work in very modest, in an engraving studio, and he made it mark, first of all, with these historical scenes. This is Father Joffre protecting a madman. There's a madman here, and all the locals have got incensed by him, and they want to stone him, and Father Joffre holds out his hand to protect him. And in fact, he was quite a well-known figure in history. He founded the first lunatic asylum in Valencia in 1410. Sorolla comes from Valencia, it's his hometown. And then he goes in for social realist, this powerful work of a wounded fisherman being tended by his companions in the cabin of this fishing boat. It doesn't look very good for the poor wounded fisherman. And there's this ironic title, and they say that fish is expensive. You get the whole feeling of this harsh life. He's unsparing of us in exposing the sort of hardship that these men endure in bringing back the fish. And this was an early successful picture. And of course, another one that's another of the stars of the show, another Marguerite, this poor woman who's apparently, one assumes, has murdered her child and has been taken in the train off to prison. A sort of very bleak view of life, this poor young woman with her handcuffs. And this again was a picture, it's a big picture, makes a big mark. It was in the Chicago World's Fair, which is a very important, one of the first really important international shows. I mean, of course, there have been others in Paris and London, etc. But a lot of these painters really come into international prominence. Zorn certainly does, Anders Zorn, the Scandinavian artist, and Sargent and Sorolla, and they're the sort of stars. And then we've seen this before, the return from fishing. This is another great social realist, if you like, scene, but Sorolla hits the beach. He never looks back, really. These wonderful, this feeling of the light, or the sea, these great sweeps, and the way that he uses the sail as a terrific feature of the composition, bringing in these, gosh, they're earthy, those oxen, and the man carrying, obviously here, carrying the thing that's going to stabilize the boat once they've got it up onto the beach, a fishing scene. And this, which I'm my favourite picture in the exhibition, I think that sail spiralling into the composition is absolutely extraordinary, and then going straight on out to sea, as it were. You barely notice the workers sewing away. It's actually, and dazzling flowers on either side, and then this great sweep of this. And look what he does with white. Of course, Sargent and Sorolla are absolutely obsessed with white, but what they can do with white. And when you get up close, there's every other colour, they're almost except white. But they're all the different tones in there, and what he does, and the shape of it, as he scribbles around. Anyway, I think it's absolutely... Sargent doesn't really make his mark in London. He makes his mark in Boston and New York in 1887 and then in 1890, but it takes a long time for the conservative British to accept Sargent. And it was really this picture on the left of Lady Agnew that really put Sargent on the map. It just blew everything else off the walls of the Academy. She's a dangerous lady to know, I always think. That cool, appraising gaze, but and the way she's lounging back in the French bergère chair, all those different textures. It's a sort of Chinese silk hanging behind, and then this the covering, the chintzy covering, and again this great sweep of white in the front, and the mauve sash. There was a wonderful lecture given recently at a Sargent conference by a French art historian, and she gave the lecture on the colour mauve. Mauve is the colour of the decadence, it's the colour of the 1890s. And now I see mauve everywhere in Sargent, and it's such a telling feature, that sash hanging down. And I feel she might at any moment spring out of that chair. She may look from the hand over the side of the chair like that. She may be tremendously indolent, but I feel there's a force about her. And compared to other portraits of that time, which tend to be much darker, more idealized, this was like a breath of fresh air, this picture. Anyway, it led to his election as an academician, and he never looked back. And again, in America, he's riding high. This is Ada Rahan, the actress, well-known American actress, flamboyant character. I love the sort of Rubensian tapestry behind her, and that wonderful great feathered fan she's carrying. She's not actually on stage, but you feel she might be. And actually, there's a rather good story about her, because she wasn't really, she was Irish, she was Ada Crean, but her first night, when she was put up, they misspelled it as Ada C. Rahan, and once it was up in lights, she never could live it down, so she remained Ada Rahan. And two more pictures. Actually, in the 1890s, it's very true that the British aristocracy didn't really take to Sargent until he's safe, and in the 90s he's still not. So all the great pictures of the Marlboroughs and the Devonshires really belong to the post-1900. And so here's Asher Wertheim, a famous art dealer, supplying very high-class French 18th century furniture to people. He commissions 9, if not 10 portraits of his family. He's the most important patron of Sargent, and here he is, looking ever so wily. And I love the witticism of his poodle with his tongue. The poodle's tongue is hanging out. Of course, he's smoking a cigar. And this one, Mrs. Karl Meyer, the wife of a rich banker from whom had made his money in South Africa, diamonds and all that. There she is, in a sort of little 18th century, and she seems to be sliding, that wonderful great pink dress. She seems to be sliding out of the space with her 2 children, sort of hidden behind. Somebody said, "Oh yes, well, you know what that's really about. It's back, children, back. She doesn't want anybody to stand in her way. And those two pictures of Asher Wertheimer and Lady Meyer, Mrs. Karl Meyer, they were in the 1900s. We've heard about the Paris exhibition, which is very big the ultimate international exhibition, along with Sad Inheritance, which is, we might almost say, the last of Sorolla's social realist pictures, but cast in the idiom of the beach, that amazing seascape behind, just extraordinary, and these poor crippled children. Great, great work of art. But these, and it was Sargent and Sorolla who were the sort of won gold medals at that international show, a very, very important moment for this kind of bravura, light-filled painting. And there, yes, I should say a little bit. Sargent's very, he goes several times to Spain. He's very keen. He loves Spanish music. He used to keep his sitters going with records, some of which survive in the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum. He gave a whole lot of Spanish records to her. He used to keep his sitters lively by playing them these Spanish. And he himself played Albanian. He was a great pianist. He's also well read in Spanish literature. He loves Spain. And just a commercial, there's going to be an exhibition in the National Gallery of Art in Washington on Sargent and Spain, which I'm slightly involved with. So that's coming in 2022. Anyway, there's also going to be a Sargent in Fashion in 2021 at the Tate. There seem to be rather a lot of Sargent shows. And here, Sargent and Sorolla seem to have met in Spain in 1903. They became quite good friends, and when Sorolla comes to London, Sargent offers advice, he gives him dinner, and they exchange pictures. Sargent gives one of his little interior scenes in a mule inside a stable, and Sorolla gives Sargent one of the studies for Sad Inheritance. In fact, he seems to, in the exhibition, there's one that's given to Chase. He seems to have been handing these out to his fellow artists. And just to remind you about some of the other artists, this is Sorolla, this is Zorn, Anders Zorn, the Swedish artist. There's another great museum, the Zorn Museum in Mora, quite up in, which is a wonderful place to visit. And here, Midsummer Dance. Did lots of nude women in the Baltic swimming. Anyway, I thought I'd just, and of course also another person I think was quite influential for Sorolla, more probably than for Sargent, is Peter Kroyer, the again Scandinavian artist, and you can see here two of his wife and a friend, and there's Kroyer with his wife again, and you can see the kind of influence Kroyer, slightly older artist. So this Scandinavian, very important, often not talked about a lot, the importance of these Scandinavian artists, all part of this same international set. And Kroyer is also exhibiting in Paris in 1900. And of course, there are lots of parallels to be drawn between Sargent and Sorolla. Here, there you see Lord Ribblesdale, the master of the Gutsbach-hounds, and Alfonso XIII, and you almost identical poses. But the Sargent's much more reserved, in a way, much more contained, whereas Sorolla's showing him out of doors. It's much looser, it's much more flamboyant in a way than, but it's, I think, a very good instance of both the links and also the distinctions. Sorolla is more flamboyant and freer in his brushwork and his conceptions than Sargent. But I think it's a very instructive parallel. And two more comparisons. This wonderful one of Veroeti, sort of very Velázquez influenced. And Velázquez is such a key figure. I mean, if you went to the Prado to study Velázquez and then you went to Harlem to study Franz Hals, those were the two sort of places. And there on the right is Edward Robinson, who was director of the Metropolitan Museum, very highly cultivated man. And two more pictures, female, Mrs. Miss Warren, painted in the Gothic room at Isabel Stewart Gardner's house, and Sorolla's portrait of his wife. She was an inveterate model. He really ought to have paid her, painted her so often. You know, she was absolutely fascinating. I think that what Sargent does with costume is just extraordinary. The little girl, I think she's not really a dress at all. He just draped something around her. He manipulates it, and this wonderful shimmering colour that he achieves. It's quite. In fact, the Sargent in this case is rather more flamboyant than the Sorolla. And famous people, of course, Henry Taft, which is I love his laughing face. The Roosevelt's not one of Sargent's great portraits. And actually, he had terrible trouble with it because every 5 minutes, secretaries would come in and ask him to sign things, and then he would get up. And so he was a very restless sitter. And I'm going to end with really comparisons because in the same way that Sorolla begins to say, I'm going to do my own thing, Sargent gives up painting portraits in 1907. It seems inconceivable that a portrait painter at the height of his power should take early retirement, but that's exactly what Sargent did. He said, no more, I'll paint your houses, your gates, your windows, whatever, but not the human face. And he stuck to his word. And so he, again, like Sorolla, has one-man shows. He wants to finish the murals, which are hanging fire, and he wants to paint landscapes. He wants to be thinking about his last 10 or 15, how's he going to spend his last years? And it's not painting portraits. It's a very intriguing, inevitably his arm is twisted on a number of occasions, and so he does do a few, but by and large he abandons. And he really becomes, to some extent, a sort of full-time landscape artist. And here is Sorolla, a wonderful picture in the exhibition of the view over the hills to the distant Sierra Nevada, painted from the region of Granada, which is a great favourite of Sargent's. And there's Sargent's picture of the same scene, much cooler in tonality, with goats in the foreground, Sargent loved. And again, it's an evening scene, the raking light falling across the landscape. It's not a well-known picture. I've used some of his pictures. It's been on loan, I think it still is, at the National Museum of Wales. And here they are, out of doors. We've got the photographic evidence. Of course, you never know quite how much did they finish in the studio, how much was actually done out of doors. But they both prided themselves on being plein air artists, and that means, you know, with all the inconveniences of handling large canvases out of doors. Sorolla on the right, Sargent here with an Italian friend in the Alps, and again painting by the side of a stream below. And of course, painting out of doors is also a social activity. Sargent always goes with his family to the Alps, and then he goes with friends, And so it's very important to remember that these artists, and same with Sorolla, he often has friends or his family with him. And so you see some of the companions here sketching away. There's his sister, Emily, with Eliza Wedgwood. And this is a picture of Maria Sorolla's painter daughter out of doors. They look at the way the light comes through these painting umbrellas. And of course their feeling for light and colour and water, the way that light both reflects and absorbs light. And there the white boat, and this is two little boys here in Mallorca. And a wonderful picture. I love this, the presence of the artist indicated by the painting umbrella. Just shimmering, isn't it? You almost can't look at it, you need dark glasses. And Sargent painting by the side of the Alps, just the schemes of paint replicating the complex reflections within the water and bouncing off the water. And again, you can see his presence, here, because that's the shadow of the artist here, painting. And their landscapes are often very, very similar. This is one in Seville, and Sargent spent the whole season in New York. This wonderful feeling for the richness of trees and plants, and the way that light comes through. They painted the same sort of places, La Granja, one of the great royal palaces around Madrid. There's Clotilde La Granja. And of course, the architecture of Spain, they're both absorbed by the same Bridget Toledo, Alhambra. And again, their feeling for Spanish life. I love this picture, sorting the raisins. That wonderful sort of cool interior, the feeling of the women working all day, and this lovely light, and the recession down the room. Here's Sargent's Women at Work, again painted in Spain, 1912. Women washing here, sorting maize there, and then this just what Sargent can do with paint, this extraordinary way that the density of the pastel and the speed at which it's painted, lovely hanging grapes above, and of course white again, along the seashore, Sargent painting his nieces and their friends in the Alps. Of course, he didn't wear that. All the photographs show them in boots and short skirts. They had to, I think the thing was when you got up in the morning, you tried to avoid a breakfast, you tried to avoid eye contact with Sargent, otherwise you might find yourself in the field, posing all day and weren't careful. There's another one, the teas. And snapshot, I love that. One of the daughters holding a camera. They all love photography. Sargent loved photography. Very interested in it. Took photographs himself. He liked going to the flicks too. Very fond of Charlie Chaplin. And the Kashmir, a wonderful picture of all the same niece dressed, shrouded in these cashmere shawls. And how different. But again, you feel in that picture, he's looking at the old masters. It's sort of, it's a frieze of stately women crossing over, like the Seven Virgins or something. And there, of course, in Sorolla too, I always think about this, it might be a Greek vase, with figures. It has a sort of back-end quality to it. And the boys on the beach, so fluid and liquid. More restrained, the Sargent, when it's much earlier. There's 20 years between them. I love that little picture. And of course, just to end with the provinces of Spain, I rather love the provinces of Spain, unlike Edmund. I think it's glorious. It's like a great folk festival. It's a great drama. And unlike the somewhat static individual figures, I think it has tremendous life and vitality. You must all go to this Manning Society. Nobody ever goes to, or very few people ever seem to get to this Manning Society, because it used to be in a fashionable part of New York, and the fashion has receded long since, but it's a marvelous, wonderful museum. And then Sargent's more pallid, neoclassical scheme of decoration of classical scenes in the Museum of Fine Arts, the staircase, and then the Great Rotunda. I've gone on quite long enough. There you have them, the two great men. Thank you very much.